My son sold my jewelry, the very same pieces he thought were worth a fortune, the ones he believed would buy him freedom and power. He snuck them out of my drawer, handed them over to strangers, and pocketed the cash as if my life's memories were nothing more than loose change. What he didn't know was that I had already replaced those jewels years ago. The real ones were hidden far away, locked where only I could reach them. What he carried to the pawn shop was glittering glass, worthless imitations, a mirror of his greed. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I simply smiled, because in that moment I understood something deeper than betrayal. His crime had revealed his soul, and my silence had already planted the seed of his downfall. And while he celebrated his little victory, I was already preparing my first move, one that would make him realize just how empty his pockets and his heart really were. Because real family doesn't sell your blood for money. They protect it. Tell me, what would you do if your own child robbed you? I was not born with wealth in my hands. What I carried into life were calluses, hunger, and the determination to build something out of nothing. Idaho was not kind to widows. The winters were sharp, biting into your bones like they had a grudge. The summers burned fields dry, and the ground gave little without sweat poured into it. That was where I raised my son, alone. Every day started before sunrise. I would wake to the sound of wind rattling against the thin windows, the smell of cold coffee from yesterday lingering in the kitchen. My hands were already sore before the day began. But I pushed forward, because I believed my boy deserved more than this small house with its peeling paint and tired floors. I remember his little shoes lined up neatly by the door. They were always second-hand, worn thin before I even bought them, but I polished them as if they were brand new. He never knew the difference. I made sure of that. I gave up meals so he could eat more. I wore patched dresses so he could wear clean shirts to school. I pawned heirlooms, not out of greed, but survival, just so the electricity wouldn't be shut off again. Every sacrifice was worth it, or so I told myself. When his father died, I promised that boy I would carry both our weights, and I did. I stood at his bedside during fevers, worked double shifts at the diner, and scrubbed strangers' floors until my knees cracked. My life became a series of silent trades, my dignity for his chances, my dreams for his opportunities. I can still see myself in that diner uniform, the smell of bacon grease clinging to me long after I came home. My son would be at the table, his homework spread out, and I would smile even though my legs shook under me. I wanted him to believe the world was kinder than it really was, and when the time came for college, I sold a piece of our land. The little strip by the creek that my husband had loved so much, gone, just so my son could sit in classrooms I would never see. I didn't flinch. I told myself it was an investment, that one day he would look back and understand what love truly costs. But he didn't. As the years passed, I noticed the shift. The gratitude faded. The entitlement grew. The boy who once hugged me tightly before school became the man who rolled his eyes when I asked him to visit. He no longer saw sacrifice as love. He saw it as duty, my duty. Still, I gave more. The jewelry became my one quiet rebellion. Tiny tokens I refused to surrender. Not for money, not for bills. They were heirlooms, passed down through my husband's family. Each piece carried history, sweat, and legacy. A locket his grandmother wore, earrings from his great-aunt, a bracelet I was given on my wedding day. They were not just jewels. They were memory made solid. At night, when I was most exhausted, I would take them out, polish them carefully, and remind myself that some things were still mine. They sparkled like hope in a life of labor. My son never noticed the way I held on to them. Or maybe he did, and that's why they tempted him later. But even then, I wasn't foolish. I knew how easily trust can break. I had lived long enough to understand the danger of greed, even within family. So I had the real pieces locked away in a safe deposit box at the bank, leaving only imitations in the house. It was not mistrust, I told myself, just caution, and that decision would one day save me. The years blurred into one long season of giving. I gave when he bought a car and couldn't pay the insurance. I gave when he wanted to start a business that failed within months. I gave when he came home after another broken relationship, bitter and angry at the world. Each time, I opened my hands, hoping this would be the moment he saw me not just as a resource, but as a mother who bled for him. But respect never came. One afternoon, as I sat in the quiet kitchen with sunlight slanting across the faded table, I realized something that cut deeper than any bill or debt. My sacrifices had not built love. They had built entitlement. He believed my life belonged to him. And the cruelest part? I had allowed it. I thought back to the nights I cried silently in the bathroom, biting my lip so he wouldn't hear. Nights where the hunger in my stomach gnawed while he slept with a full belly. I thought back to the time I skipped medication because his school trip needed payment. To the Christmas when I wrapped used books from thrift stores and told him Santa loved him anyway. I had given him everything. And somewhere along the way, he had learned to value nothing. Still, I stayed silent. Mothers always hope, always believe tomorrow will be different, but hope has its limits. The first crack in the illusion came at Thanksgiving. I had spent 2 days cooking, the house filled with the smell of roasting turkey, cinnamon pies, and cornbread like his father used to love. I set the table with the best dishes, the ones I rarely used. When he arrived, he barely glanced at me. He scrolled through his phone as I served him. He ate without thanks. And when I asked if he might help me clear the table, he sighed, muttered something about this old-fashioned nonsense, and walked away. That night, I sat in the empty kitchen, staring at the crumbs, and I realized love had turned into servitude. And yet, I still couldn't let go, because he was my son, because I believed blood was stronger than greed, because mothers lie to themselves to keep breathing. But blood, I would learn, is weaker than money when a heart grows hollow, and the hollow in his chest was about to swallow everything I had left. When he sold the jewelry, I should have been surprised. But deep inside, I wasn't. Because betrayal never appears out of nowhere. It grows, slowly, in every act of disrespect, every entitlement, every silence where gratitude should live. And I had watched that seed grow in him for years. I just never thought it would bloom into theft. The jewelry was not the first sacrifice he had taken from me, but it would be the last. Because when he crossed that line, he didn't just sell imitation jewels. He sold the last illusion I had about him. And once illusions are gone, truth takes their place. The truth was simple. My sacrifices had raised him, but my silence had enabled him. And now it was time for silence to end. What he thought was his victory, the jewels, the money, the laughter he shared with his friends, was only the start of his downfall. Because I had already decided he would never see another piece of my real legacy. The day I discovered the betrayal, the sky over Idaho was gray, low clouds pressing against the earth like they carried secrets. I had been folding laundry, the rhythm of daily chores keeping me steady. The hum of the old washing machine, the faint smell of soap clinging to the air. It was ordinary, too ordinary for what was about to happen. When I opened my bedroom drawer, the one where I kept my jewelry box, my heart knew before my eyes confirmed it. The box was lighter. The tiny weight that had always been there was gone. I lifted the lid. Empty spaces, velvet hollows where rings and earrings once lay, the locket, the bracelet. all gone. For a moment, the room seemed to spin. My fingers tightened around the box until my knuckles whitened. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. Only silence. Heavy, crushing. It wasn't about money. It was about memory, about trust, about the invisible thread between a mother and her son. And now it had been cut. I sat down on the bed, the box trembling in my lap, and the truth hit me harder than the emptiness inside it. My son had done this. No one else came into this house. No one else knew where I kept them. No one else would dare. It was him. The boy I carried through storms, the man I sacrificed for, had reached into my drawer and stolen the very pieces that represented everything we had once stood for as a family. The betrayal burned cold. Later that evening, I searched for answers in silence. The pawn shop was the first place I went. I wrapped my coat tight against the autumn wind, my shoes crunching against gravel as I stepped into that dim little shop at the edge of town. The bell above the door jingled, cheerful, mocking. The smell of dust and old wood filled my nose as I walked to the counter. Behind it, a man with tired eyes looked up. I showed him a photo of the bracelet on my wrist. He nodded too quickly. "Yes, ma'am," he said, shifting. "Young man sold it. Said it was from his grandmother. Didn't fetch much, though. Honestly, it wasn't worth the shine." His words sliced deeper than he realized. Not worth the shine. My son had traded my memories for pocket change. I asked quietly, almost whispering, how much. He told me the number, a number so small it barely covered a week's groceries. My son hadn't even gotten rich off his betrayal. He had sold his soul for scraps. I thanked the man, though the words felt hollow in my mouth. Then I turned and walked out, the cold air hitting me like truth itself. On the way home, I replayed every moment I could have stopped this, every time I gave without question, every silence I kept when he disrespected me, every blind hope that love alone would be enough. But nothing hurt more than knowing he hadn't even thought twice. That night, he came home smiling, his breath heavy with the smell of beer. His eyes glimmered, careless. I stood in the kitchen, the jewelry box clutched in my hands. He noticed. "What's that?" he asked, casual, like the wolf pretending it wasn't covered in blood. I didn't answer. The silence said everything. He laughed. "You don't need those old things. I got good money for them. Finally did something smart." My chest tightened. I wanted to ask why, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I looked at him, really looked, and saw not my son, but a stranger wearing his face. The boy I raised was gone. In his place stood greed. He mistook my silence for weakness. He mistook my calm for surrender. But what he didn't know was that I had already outsmarted him years ago. The jewels he sold were worthless glass, trinkets, imitations. The real ones still rested where I placed them long ago, safe, untouched. As he boasted about his victory, my heart no longer broke. It hardened. Because in that moment, I knew I wasn't the victim. I was the witness. And witnesses remember. From that night forward, every glance, every word, every smile he gave me carried the weight of betrayal. But I carried something stronger, the truth. And with truth comes power. Neighbors began to notice. At church, whispers followed me. I heard the women murmur, "She worked so hard, and this is what she gets?" Their pity stung, but their judgment cut sharper. I stayed silent. Silence was my shield, until the day his arrogance betrayed him again. I overheard him boasting to a friend on the phone. He laughed loudly in the living room, his voice carrying down the hall. "She never even noticed," he bragged. "Old fool didn't know they were worth thousands. Easy money. Thousands. If only he knew." I stood behind the door listening. My hands were steady, my breath calm. His pride was my confirmation, and in that pride, he sealed his fate. Because betrayal is one thing, but arrogance is what invites justice. I realized then, he thought he had won. He thought I was powerless. He thought I was blind. But I wasn't blind. I was patient. And patience is the sharpest weapon a betrayed mother can wield. I closed the door quietly, my footsteps soft against the wooden floor. He never knew I heard. He never knew I was already planning. And as I lay in bed that night, staring into the dark, the words carved themselves into my heart. He sold dust and believed it was gold. And now I would make him choke on the dust. What he never knew was that my revenge had already begun, long before he ever touched that jewelry box. And when it came for him, it would not just take his money, it would take his pride. The morning after his betrayal, I woke to silence. The kind of silence that doesn't soothe, but accuses. Every creak of the floorboards, every drip of the faucet felt like it was asking me the same question. What are you going to do now? I sat at the kitchen table, the jewelry box still in front of me. Empty velvet slots stared back at me like missing teeth. But inside me, something had shifted. I was no longer just a mother grieving over what her son had done. I was a woman preparing to take back control. The first step was proof. I walked into town with my scarf pulled tight against the wind, the streets lined with bare trees. The pawnshop bell jingled again when I pushed the door open. Same dust, same dim light, same man behind the counter. This time my voice was calm, deliberate. I asked for the receipt from the sale. He hesitated, eyes flicking nervously, but I leaned forward, steady and unflinching. You don't want trouble, I said softly. Give me the paper. His hand trembled as he slid it across the counter. A crumpled slip of evidence. My son's signature, his betrayal in ink. I folded it carefully and tucked it into my coat pocket. Proof wasn't just for me, it was a weapon, and I intended to use it. From there, I walked 2 more blocks into a jewelry store that smelled faintly of polish and perfume. The owner, an old friend of my husband, examined the pawned pieces that had been set aside for resale. He lifted one under the light, peering through his lens. These are worthless, he said finally. Glass, cheap metal. Whoever sold them thought they were clever, but any real dealer would laugh. I nodded slowly. The sting wasn't in their worth. It was in my son's ignorance. He had gambled his soul for fake glitter, and now I knew the irony would be my shield. I thanked the jeweler and left. That afternoon I drove to the bank. The vault air was cool, metallic, humming faintly with the weight of secrets. I opened my safe deposit box, my hands steady on the key. Inside, wrapped in velvet cloth, lay the real heirlooms, gold that gleamed softly under the fluorescent lights, diamonds that caught even the faintest glow and threw it back like fire. My husband's legacy, my family's truth, untouched. I traced the locket with my fingertips, the cool metal calming me. They were still mine, still safe. My son had stolen nothing but illusions. I closed the box, locked it, and smiled for the first time in weeks. But keeping the jewels safe was not enough. I needed to secure everything else too. That evening I called an attorney. His office smelled of leather and ink, the kind of place where serious decisions are made. He looked at me over his glasses as I explained. I want to rewrite my will, I said. He raised an eyebrow. Excluding your son? I didn't hesitate. Yes, he's taken enough. We worked late into the night. Line by line, we shifted the future. My property, the house, the land, everything I had built with my bare hands would no longer be his inheritance. Instead, it would go to charity and to the only grandchild who had ever shown me true respect. When the pen scratched across the paper, signing my new will, it felt like chains breaking. My sacrifice was no longer his entitlement. But revenge is not just about papers and signatures. Revenge must be felt. So I began to plan the humiliation he would never escape. I started small. I let the neighbors see me walk into the attorney's office. I let whispers spread through the town like smoke. People began to look at him differently, questioning the pride he wore so loudly. At church, I sat taller, saying nothing, but my silence spoke volumes. And when women asked about the jewelry, I smiled faintly. "They're safe," I said, "safer than ever." The more silent I became, the more his arrogance made noise. He bragged about his big win in bars, boasting of money that slipped through his hands faster than sand. He didn't realize the town was watching, judging. Every word he spoke was a shovel, digging his own grave. At home, I burned one old photograph of us together, just one. The edges curled, smoke rising in the dim kitchen, the smell of ashes filling the air. I watched his face dissolve in the flames. It wasn't anger, it was clarity. Some things must be destroyed so others can be rebuilt. And I rebuilt my boundaries piece by piece. I fixed the broken fence in the backyard, hammer striking wood with steady rhythm. Each nail was a promise. I will not let you cross me again. I cleaned the garden, pulling weeds until my fingers ached, making space for new life to grow. Symbolic acts, maybe, but necessary. Because revenge is not only about hurting the one who wronged you, it is about healing the wound they left behind. Every night, as I lay in bed, I whispered to myself, patience. Because patience is how you turn pain into power. My son still believed he had won. He strutted around, carelessly flashing money that was already gone. He didn't notice the stares, didn't hear the whispers. But I did, and I knew. The time was coming when his pride would collapse, and it would collapse publicly, not in secret, not in whispers, but in the open, under the weight of his own arrogance. Until then, I gathered my tools, the receipt, the jeweler's testimony, the new will, and the silence that only a mother scorned can hold. Every piece was a weapon, every step a preparation. And when the day arrived, my revenge would not just expose his betrayal, it would strip away the illusion of power he had stolen, and leave him standing in front of everyone, empty-handed, because what he thought was his greatest victory was nothing more than dust, and soon the world would see it too. Revenge doesn't start with fire, it starts with silence, silence that tightens like a noose, slowly, until the one who wronged you walks into it themselves. That's how I began. After rewriting my will, after locking the true jewels back into the vault, I carried myself differently. I didn't need to scream, accuse, or beg. I only needed to wait. My son had already written the first chapter of his downfall with his greed. All I had to do was write the last. The first step was cutting off the lifeline he thought I'd never close. For years, whenever his bills stacked up, whenever his schemes failed, he came to me. My purse was his safety net, my labor his cushion. But no more. When he came knocking one evening, eyes wild, asking for money, just until payday, I looked him in the eye, steady as stone. "I can't help you anymore." He blinked, confused. "What do you mean, can't?" I let the silence linger, heavy, before answering. "You sold what wasn't yours. You made your choice. Now live with it." He laughed, sharp, bitter. "You'll cave. You always do." But I didn't. He left angry, slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled. Yet inside me, there was peace. For the first time in years, I hadn't bent. That was revenge step one. No more sacrifices for someone who saw them as his right. The second step was exposure, not through my voice, through his own. I let him boast, let him brag. He told anyone who would listen about how clever he was, how he outsmarted his old mother, how he made thousands off jewels she didn't appreciate. He didn't realize the whole town already knew the truth, that what he had pawned was worthless glass, that the real jewels had never left my hands, and I made sure the whispers reached the right ears, the church ladies, the shopkeepers, even the lawyer who handled my estate. Small comments, gentle smiles, and the truth was carried on the wind. By the time he strutted into the bar one Friday night, loud and full of drink, people no longer saw a clever man. They saw a fool who robbed his own mother for nothing. His reputation began to crack. That was revenge step 2. Let his pride rot in public. The third step was legal, quiet, precise. I called the attorney again. Together, we filed notices that shifted property, deeds, and accounts into secure trusts. The land that he once assumed would be his, no longer. The savings he thought he would inherit, redirected. His future, the one he counted on, slipped through his fingers without him even knowing. And when the time came, he would learn all at once, when it was too late to beg, too late to undo. That was revenge step 3. Strip away the inheritance he thought he owned. But revenge is not only about taking, it's about symbolism. I burned another photograph, this one of my wedding day, not because I hated the memory, but because I wanted to remind myself that fire cleanses. The flames licked across the paper, curling edges, the smoke sharp in my nose. I whispered to myself, some legacies must end so new ones can begin. I repaired my husband's old rocking chair, sanding the wood until it gleamed, reweaving the seat with strong rope. Each movement was slow, steady, repairing something broken while preparing to break the illusions of another. Every hammer strike, every brush of sandpaper was a vow. I am not weak. I am not blind. That was revenge step 4, rebuild myself while dismantling him. The turning point came when he returned, weeks later, demanding answers. His money had run out. His so-called friends had abandoned him. His laughter was gone. He stormed into the house, his voice echoing through the walls. Where's the rest of it? Where are the real jewels? Don't lie to me. I sat at the table calm, hands folded. You already sold them, I said. He slammed his fist down, rattling the dishes. They were worth more. I know it. You're hiding something. I looked up slowly, meeting his eyes. I hid them years ago, because I knew this day would come. His face drained of color. You knew? Yes, I whispered. And you proved me right. The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. He had no words, no excuses, only rage. He left again, but this time his steps were unsteady, because now he knew he hadn't stolen from me. He had only exposed himself, and soon everyone else would see it too, because revenge isn't complete until the mask is ripped off in front of others, and I was already preparing the stage. He thought the worst was behind him, but it hadn't even begun, because my revenge wasn't just private anymore. It was about to become public, and when it did, he would never escape the shame. The day of the confrontation came dressed in sunlight, but beneath it, the air carried a tension you could taste. It was the annual family gathering, the only time in the year when cousins, aunts, uncles, and neighbors filled the old house with chatter. I baked pies the night before, set the table with my best china, polished the silver that hadn't been touched in years. Not because I wanted to please anyone, but because appearances matter. Revenge, to be felt, must have witnesses. By noon, the driveway was lined with cars. Children ran across the yard, their laughter bright against the hum of adult voices. Inside, the living room filled with the smell of roasted ham and fresh bread. The walls, worn with decades of struggle, suddenly seemed alive with energy, and in the center of it all, my son stood like a rooster, loud, boastful. His voice carried above the others as he bragged about his new investments, about smart deals, about money he never truly had. People nodded politely, but I saw the glances, saw the small smirks when he wasn't looking. The town already knew what he had done. This was not respect he received, it was amusement. I waited, patient, silent. When dinner was served, everyone gathered at the long table. Plates clattered, glasses filled, the scent of cinnamon and roasted meat mixing with anticipation. My son raised his glass, his face flushed with pride and drink. To hard work, he declared, smirking, and to knowing how to make the right moves at the right time. A ripple of polite laughter followed. He basked in it, leaning back as though he were a king. That was the moment I chose. I set my fork down gently, the sound sharp in the sudden hush. All eyes turned to me. "I wonder," I said softly, "if stealing from your own mother counts as a smart move." The air froze. Conversations died mid-sentence. The only sound was the faint tick of the old clock on the wall. My son blinked, his glass halfway to his lips. "What are you talking about?" He forced a laugh, nervous. I stood slowly, my hands steady, my voice calm. "The jewelry box, the heirlooms, you sold them, told people you made thousands. But the truth is—" I paused, letting the silence bite. "You sold glass, worthless trinkets, and the whole town knows it." Gasps fluttered around the table. Forks dropped onto plates. He slammed his glass down. "You're lying." I reached into my pocket and laid the pawnshop receipt on the table. His name, his signature, in black ink for all to see. "This is the proof," I said. "You didn't just steal from me. You stole your own dignity." Murmurs spread. His cousins whispered, eyes wide. His aunt shook her head in disgust. My son's face reddened, sweat beading at his temple. "That's not— You don't understand." I stepped closer, my voice firm. "I understand perfectly. You thought you were clever. You thought you robbed me blind. But I was never blind. The real jewels were never in that box. I protected them because I knew greed lived in you." He staggered back as though struck. "The real jewels?" His voice cracked. "Yes," I said, my words slicing the air. "Safe, untouched, waiting for someone worthy, someone who values love more than money, someone who isn't you." The room was silent, the weight of truth pressing down. Then his cousin spoke, low and sharp. "You stole from your own mother, for nothing?" Laughter broke out at the far end of the table, harsh, unforgiving. It spread quickly, cruel in its honesty. My son's pride shattered in front of everyone. He tried to speak, but his words drowned in their whispers. I looked at him one last time, my voice steady, final. "You sold your inheritance for dust, and dust is all you will ever get from me." His hands trembled as he pushed back from the table, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him, but the echoes of laughter followed. For a long moment, silence returned. Then someone at the table lifted their glass. "To her strength," they said quietly. Glasses clinked, and for the first time in years, I felt seen. The humiliation was complete. Not because I screamed, not because I fought, but because truth spoke louder than his lies. He had robbed me of nothing but illusions, and I had stripped him of everything that mattered: respect, reputation, and the inheritance he thought was his. That night, as I washed the last dish, the house quiet again, I felt a strange peace settle in my chest. The storm had broken, but in its place there was calm. My son thought the confrontation was the end, but for me, it was only the beginning of peace. Because revenge isn't just about destroying someone else. It's about finally reclaiming yourself. After the confrontation, the house felt different, quieter. Not the silence of grief, but the silence of release. Like the walls themselves had exhaled after holding their breath for too long. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor, warm and golden. For the first time in years, I sat with a cup of coffee that didn't taste of bitterness. It tasted of freedom. My son had left in disgrace. His reputation lay in pieces across the town, and though people still whispered, their whispers no longer stung me. They spoke of his greed, not my weakness. They saw me not as a fool, but as a woman who stood her ground. And that mattered more than I can put into words. The first step in peace was simple: reclaiming my home. I scrubbed every corner, polished the floors, washed the curtains until they smelled of lavender. Each task was more than cleaning. It was erasing his shadow. The spaces he once filled with arrogance became mine again. In the evenings, I lit candles and read by the window. The air no longer felt heavy. The weight of enabling, of carrying someone else's sins, had lifted. I found myself humming as I cooked. Small songs from my childhood, my husband's favorites, songs I hadn't sung in years because they reminded me of sacrifices that felt thankless. Now, they reminded me of resilience. One afternoon I returned to the bank. The safe deposit box was cool, the metal humming faintly. When I opened it, the jewels glimmered softly, untouched, patient. I didn't cry. Instead, I smiled, because they had outlasted his greed, just as I had. I didn't bring them home. I left them there, safe, knowing they were no longer a symbol of fear, but of wisdom. They weren't chains. They were proof that preparation and patience win where greed fails. But the greatest healing came from the garden. The soil was rough at first, hardened from neglect, but my hands knew the rhythm. Dig, turn, water, wait. I planted flowers, tomatoes, herbs that carried sharp scents into the air. With every seed, I whispered a promise. This is for me now. By midsummer, colors bloomed, red, yellow, violet, and the air smelled of basil and fresh earth. Birds returned, filling the mornings with song. Neighbors stopped by, their eyes kinder now, their voices softer. They admired the flowers, accepted jars of homemade jam, and left with smiles that weren't laced with pity. One woman said quietly, "You're stronger than most of us could ever be." I didn't answer. I just smiled. Because strength isn't loud, it's steady. My son tried to return once. Weeks after his humiliation, he knocked on the door, his eyes tired, his face worn from pride crumbling into dust. I opened the door but didn't step aside. "Mother," he began, his voice softer than I'd heard in years. I made a mistake. The old me would have melted, would have believed, would have sacrificed again. But the woman standing there now, she knew better. "You didn't make a mistake," I said quietly. "You made a choice." He swallowed hard, searching for words. "Can we fix this?" I shook my head slowly. I already did. And I closed the door. There was no anger in the motion, only peace. Because forgiveness does not mean forgetting, and love does not mean surrender. He walked away, and I didn't watch him go. Instead, I turned back to my garden, where life was blooming in the soil I had tended with my own hands. That was the family I chose now, the one rooted in care, not greed. The final step of my resolution was sealing my legacy. With the attorney, I finalized the trusts. My home, my land, and yes, even the real jewels, would go not to the son who betrayed me, but to causes and people who understood value, a local shelter, a scholarship fund, and most importantly, my granddaughter, the only one who had ever visited not for money, but for love. When I signed the final papers, the attorney looked at me with respect. "You've ensured your legacy," he said. I nodded. "No, I've ensured my dignity." Because legacy without dignity is just wealth waiting to be stolen. As the seasons turned, I found joy in small things again. The creak of the rocking chair I repaired, the scent of fresh pies cooling on the counter, the laughter of children who visited from next door, running through my garden with bare feet. Life became simple, but simple is not the same as empty. Simple is peace. And in that peace, I discovered something I had forgotten: myself. I was not just a mother, not just a widow, not just a provider. I was a woman who had endured storms and still stood tall. A woman who had been stripped of illusions and yet walked away with truth. And truth is the strongest jewel of all. Now, when I walk through the town, I hold my head high. Not with pride, but with clarity. People nod with respect, not pity. They whisper about my strength, not my sacrifice. And when they ask if I regret what I did, my answer is simple: no, because real family doesn't count your money. They count your sacrifices. That is the lesson my son never learned, and that is the truth I will carry to my last breath. Because in the end, revenge wasn't about punishing him. It was about freeing myself. And freedom is the sweetest piece of all. Real family does not measure you by your wallet. They measure you by your sacrifices, your love, your loyalty. My son thought money was worth more than blood. He was wrong. He lost the jewels. He lost his inheritance. And in the end, he lost me. Because the truth is simple. Respect is the only treasure that lasts. Everything else turns to dust. If you've ever given everything to someone who only took, if you've ever been betrayed by the ones who should have protected you, know this: you are not weak. You are not worthless. You are stronger than they will ever understand. Tell me, have you ever been used by your own family? Share your story below. And don't forget, subscribe for more true stories.